The announcement of the Lumix S1R Mark II is probably the biggest news happening right now, and the specs look great on paper, but beyond the specs, there's a few things that we need to keep our eye on. But before we get started, like this video, hit the subscribe button, and consider joining the channel. Channel members get exclusive access to Filmmaker Alchemy, behind-the-scenes lessons and insights on the business of video production. Learn how to turn your content into gold. Big news happening with the Lumix S1R Mark II. Very exciting camera. Obviously will be a huge hybrid. If you're shooting photo, if you're shooting video, the S1R Mark II has you covered in more ways than one. We've got a 44 megapixel sensor. We've got 8K video, 8K open gate even coming with a future firmware release that hopefully will come soon after release. The S1R Mark II is supposedly going to be shipping mid-March. So happening all right now, very exciting, but there's a few things that I want to call your attention to when it comes to the S1R Mark II, and that's some of the restrictions, some of the potential limitations that we'll really have to see if this actually plays out, you know, being the perfect hybrid, having all these amazing features, or if there's anything kind of behind the scenes that's going to be a gotcha, that's going to be a, oh, actually that kind of is unfortunate. And one of the first ones that we have to talk about is overheating. Unfortunately, we live in a time where these cameras come out with these eye-bleeding specs, and yet they never really tell you if it's going to overheat or not. Now, people are saying and speculating that the Lumix S1R Mark II won't overheat because it does have ventilation. It has some kind of thermal management built in, and it's not obvious, but that's kind of smart if Lumix did their job right. You see under the Lumix logo, there's a little grooving, a little bit of something happening right there under the Lumix logo, right in the banner there on the front of the camera. And that is where those vents are to hopefully reduce that thermal stress on the camera. If you know me, you know my huge gripe with a lot of these cameras. They tend to overheat when they're focused so much on these huge, crazy, big specs. And then you go use the camera and you go, okay, great, I can record for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I just got to shut down. I got to pop the lens off. I got to let this thing cool down. That's not functional. That's not fun. No one wants to spend $3,000, $4,000 on a camera that's cooked half the time. So I am glad to see those vents, but is it going to be enough? The S1R Mark II has more resolution than the S5 Mark II. The S5 Mark II, great, flawless, has the thermal management, has the vents, doesn't overheat. I love the S5 Mark II, but if they're taking a similar approach, now these vents aren't the same as the S5 Mark II, but if it's a similar approach in terms of how the camera is handling the cooling, being more like passively cooled versus directly cooled, I don't know the internals and how it exactly works, but we do have some ventilation, but is it going to be enough? Is it going to be adequate for something that's 44 megapixels? If we're shooting 8K open gate, how long can this camera actually do it? Are these vents along the front there going to be enough? Or is it going to be, yes, it's ventilated, but still not sufficient to actually have those continuous record times in a way that makes you feel safe and secure with what you're recording, not worrying about the camera giving you alerts saying it's overheating and all of a sudden you got to stop your recording and it's a huge pain. No one wants to deal with that. I hope we're past that time, but it is one of those things that we need to keep an eye on and make sure that this thing can actually deliver these specs for the price point. Because I think at this point, if you're going to advertise that it can do X, Y, and Z, it has to be able to do that consistently without some kind of limitation in terms of overheating. The other factor that we have to pay attention to with the S1R Mark II is that sensor readout speed. So yes, it can do 44 megapixels. Yes, it can do 8K video. Yes, it can do all these great, amazing things. But are we going to be dealing with more rolling shutter than we have on the S5 Mark II, or are we going to be dealing with less? I'll be quite impressed if this sensor is fast enough to minimize that rolling shutter effect. No one wants jello or jitter or any of the skew or the distortion that you get from a slow rolling shutter. And before this announcement, everyone was speculating that this sensor might not be that fast. Now we do have a new sensor, is what they're calling it. But we really have to see what are those readout speeds? How fast is this sensor? And is it going to be able to keep up with some of the demands of photographers and videographers these days? When you look at something like the S1R Mark II having 40 frames per second photo, 40 frames per second photo burst, that's crazy. But that's only electronic shutter, meaning it's more prone to that rolling shutter skew. And if you're trying to do fast action photography, 40 frames per second, very impressive, very nice. But if there's too much jello, too much wobble, too much skew, it's not going to cut it for most people. Same thing is true for video. 8K open gate is awesome if that sensor is fast enough to keep up with high-speed video. You know, maybe you're just filming talking heads and it's not that important, but if you are doing anything fast, action-oriented, you're going to want a fast sensor readout to minimize that rolling shutter, because we don't have global shutter. Sony's got that in the A9, so we know that they can do, so it is possible with some sacrifices, with some compromises. There's always trade-offs, but what are you willing to work with? And I'm okay with the rolling shutter as long as it's fast enough. Another thing to pay attention to is one of those gotchas that could sneak in behind the scenes and you think, oh, wow, this camera sounds awesome on paper, but then you go use it and you go, oh, why are my images skewed? Why is my video skewed? Why am I getting all this wobble and jello and distortion? Could be a problem depending on what you're filming. The other big gotcha is just what's always true, and that there's always some next generation of cameras, next generation of products coming on the horizon. It's coming, but how soon will it be here? I don't know. No one really knows, but I feel like the S1R Mark II brings the S1 lineup to the current present day. We have features now in the S1R Mark II that were sorely missing from the S1R, the original version. We finally have phase hybrid autofocus. We've got 8K video finally catching up the S1 line to what Nikon has been doing, what Canon has been doing for a long time now. The Canon R5 had 8K video. Granted, it was compromised, but then they had the Canon R5C, which kind of fixed some of those compromises. Nikon has been doing 8K video for a while now. And so the S1R Mark II gets us into that 8K 30 video territory for a decent price point, right? You're spending upwards of $3,000, close to $4,000 for this type of camera. But what's next from Nikon? What's next from Canon? What's next from Sony? There's always something looming on the horizon. And if it comes sooner rather than later, the S1R Mark II might get dated pretty quickly, actually, because I think in a lot of ways, Panasonic, Lumix, they've been playing catch up, and it's great to see them do it. Finally, the S1R Mark II. If you've been shooting with the S1R for upwards of 6 years now, I'm sure you're looking at this going, yes, I can use all my lenses that I love with the latest and greatest in features, technology, 8K video, phase hybrid autofocus, this amazing flippy screen. The body style maybe isn't your preference. Maybe you want a little bit bigger body style, but regardless, this is a very exciting camera. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are enthusiastic about the S1R Mark II because it does deliver. Those features on paper do look incredible. However, there's always something new. There's always something. What's the next camera from Lumix? Are we finally going to get something with an internal ND filter? What's next from Nikon? What's next from Canon? What's next for Sony? Will the S1R Mark II have the longevity that it needs to survive, or will it be more of a flash in the pan? Hey, this looks great. Yes, the features are awesome on paper. Yes, the price point is right, but the new stuff just overshadows it immediately. I don't know, but that's always in the back of my mind when I'm ever considering a purchase like this, whenever I'm looking at what do I want to invest in. I want to invest in equipment, in cameras and technology that lasts, that isn't just a, hey, that was great for the moment, but 6 months later, it was immediately outdated by the next big thing. And that's always a risk you're going to take. So what my advice is, buy the thing you actually need. Don't just buy the thing you want, buy the thing you actually need. If it solves a problem that you currently have, you literally need something like an S1R Mark II, like as in yesterday, then yeah, go ahead and pick it up. Because if it solves that problem that you have and it fills that need, go ahead and get it. But if you're buying it because you think it looks cool, looks awesome, and you want it, and you think maybe one day I'll need it, but right now I just want it, that's the stuff I would say. Maybe put it on pause, put it in your cart, save it for later, and don't buy it right now, because when the time comes you actually need something like this, there might be a better option at that point in time in the market. And that's just the painful truth of products, of technology. Stuff always gets better. And so yes, if you're making decisions now worrying about what's going to happen in 3 years, no one can read those tea leaves perfectly. It's really hard to forecast. So I always say, buy what you actually need now and save those future concerns, those future problems, the future forecasts for the future, right? Buy what you need now if you might need something in the future, wait till that future scenario actually unfolds, because then you'll be making a decision in what becomes the present, right? Once we move to that future, there'll be a new set of circumstances, products, technology, it shifts, it changes all the time. Price points go up, they go down. There's no way to know exactly what that future holds, but make that decision later in the future when the future becomes the present. Don't make that decision right now for some potential future that no one can predict. No one knows exactly how things are going to unfold. You're not going to know what you're going to need 2 years from now, 1 year. So if the S1R Mark II makes sense for you right now, go ahead, pick it up. Given those considerations that we talked about, making sure that readout speed is fast enough for your needs and making sure that it's not going to overheat on you. If you need something that is that reliable, if you're going to buy a true hybrid that can do photo and video and do them both well, make sure that that video side of the equation, that ventilation, thermal management is well considered. We'll have to see. Everyone's use case is a little bit different. So just make sure it applies. But those are the two things. The specs all look great on paper. The price point looks nice, very attractive considering all these amazing features. Like 8K open gate, like come on, right? It's just awesome. However, if you don't actually need that right now, maybe wait, maybe delay a little bit, make that purchase later. Maybe the price comes down, maybe something new enters the market. You never actually know what's going to happen in the future. But if you do need it now for whatever your projects are, then yeah, go ahead and buy one as long as you're taking into all those considerations, all those little gotchas. The marketing, what's at the forefront, all those features look great, sound great on paper, but really have to dive in and kind of know underneath the hood, what's really going on? How does this thing actually perform in the real world? I'm excited to hopefully get my hands on one eventually so I can put it through my testing that I normally do. But you might want to do the same thing because, again, everyone's projects, everyone's clients are a little bit different. Everyone has different use case scenarios. So the S1R Mark II could be a great camera, could solve all those problems, but also maybe could have some downsides as well. We won't know until we actually get our hands on these things. And I'm excited for that day when or if that comes. But for now, I'm always in the back of my mind making a list of all those things. Like what are the things that are going to upset me the most? Yes, it looks great, but where's the rug pull? What's the the little trap waiting there to get me when you say, oh yeah, this looks awesome, except blah, 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 fill in the blank with whatever it is. Maybe you have your own list. Let me know in the comments if you have your gotchas or the things that you're worried about or concerned about or you want to look deeper into. Please let me know in the comments. I think we all have our own opinions about what we care about the most, what our priorities are. The S1R Mark II looks great on paper. Those specs look really, really nice, very appealing, very attractive, but also, what are you worried about? What are you concerned about? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear it.